and welcome to the special program entitled The Collective Spirit of Aging Through a Human Rights Perspective. This program is planned and sponsored by the Center for International Social Work Studies at UConn School of Social Work. We've put together an excellent panel, which we will introduce to you shortly. My name is Rebecca. I'm a professor at the UConn School of Social Work and the director of the center. I, along with two graduate interns, Christine and Fernando, will serve as moderators for this program. The center's advisory board, in its planning meetings, thought it was really important to address this topic of human rights of older persons. And we've invited our expert panelists to share with us nuggets of information in a short period of time. I mean, really short period of time. We've given them 15 minutes each, leaving some time for question and answer period at the end. So we invite you to please put your comments or questions at the chat, and we will monitor your queries. I now will invite Christine to read our land acknowledgement statement.
We begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scottacoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Nipmuc, and Lenape peoples, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example.
Thank you, Christine. And now I will invite our Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, Dr. Joanne Corbin, to provide a word of welcome to our participants.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this program, The Collective Spirit of Aging Through a Human Rights Perspective. Thank you to the Center for International Social Work Studies with the directorship of Professor Rebecca Thomas for developing this program. According to the World Health Organization, all countries face major challenges to make sure that their infrastructure and systems are prepared to support the needs of people 60 years and older. By 2050, the proportion of the world's population over 60 years will increase from 12% to 22%. In 2050, 80% of older people will be living in low and middle income countries. Understanding, addressing, and supporting the holistic needs of a population as it ages is incumbent upon all of us. It's important to understand the experiences and needs of aging populations across an ecological perspective, meaning the individual level, micro, meso, exo, and macro levels, and across the full range of a person's well-being, the physical and psychological health, the social and communal areas, and emotional and moral. The task is significant, and social work is focusing on these issues through the grand challenges. One of those challenges is advancing long and productive lives. Today's panel will discuss the need for applying a human rights perspective to this global issue. I welcome you to this discussion and thank the Center for International Social Work Studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Corbin. Michelle Bachelet, the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, on May 21st, May 2020, stated that every life has equal value. Our rights do not diminish with age. How appropriate. I too had an idea to provide some data, but thank you, Dr. Corbin, for highlighting the increasing aging population, and by 2050, we will have about 1.5 billion older persons. Population aging is a global phenomenon, and it has profound implications for human rights for all. And we've made great strides in preserving and increasing the lifespan of older persons. But we do understand that these outcomes and achievements are not equal. We recognize that poverty, race, and lack of access to positive health outcomes shed light on the inadequate protection mechanisms for all and the existing gaps in policies and programs to address the situation of older persons. Our responses to the elderly have been, in a way, targeted rather than universal as a right. We also understand that COVID-19 has really amplified the critical human rights protection gaps for older persons that have perpetuated over the years. Such discrimination based on old age, lack of social protection and access to health services, lack of autonomy and participation in decision-making, and freedom from violence and neglect and abuse has really impacted these older populations, including myself as I'm aging in this process. In recent years, we have seen significant calls for enhanced actions to promote the full enjoyment and the dignity for older persons if they continue to choose to work. At the recent 61st Commission for Social Development held in February 2023, there was much discussion on creating full and productive employment and decent work for all, including older persons. One suggestion was to have an intergenerational workforce that includes persons that includes older persons working with younger persons. In such an environment, mutual learning and respect can occur. We also recognize that older persons are not a homogeneous group. The challenges they face in the protection or enjoyment of their human rights vary greatly. Many older persons have significant contributions to make in our society. In a rapidly aging world, there is an urgency to recognize older persons as specific right holders to enable them to fully participate in social, economic, cultural, political life on an equal basis without discrimination. I will now invite our panelists to speak to some of these issues that older persons face. They include unpacking the framework of human rights and aging, lack of transportation as a human right and its related structural issues, and to address healthy aging across Latino populations in the United States and Latin America. So I'm going to now invite Fernanda to introduce our first panelist speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. I have the pleasure of announcing our first panelist, Dr. Carol Cox. Dr. Carol Cox is a professor at the Graduate School of Social Service at Fordham University. She is a fellow of the Gerontological Society of America and a Fulbright Scholar. The majority of her research is in the area of gerontology and policy, with a focus on the human rights of older adults. Dr. Cox, go ahead. Oh, and you're muted, Dr. Cox.
Let me start again. I'm honored to be here today because to me, human rights and aging are so integral to where we are as a society and to what we need. And I don't want to repeat things that have already been said so well by Rebecca. Social work is a human rights profession. Social justice and human rights underscore the profession. What we know is that as people age, their rights are continually taken away. I'm only going to focus on the United States because that's a big one. And let me just add, a few years ago, I wrote this book, and I guess it's upside down, Social Policy for an Aging Society, a Human Rights Perspective. And in getting ready for today's talk, I started looking over what I wrote and how sad it is that in the last 5 years, we haven't made any progress. And if anything, as Rebecca just mentioned, COVID probably made things worse because COVID showed the disparity that exists, and I'm only talking about the US, that exists in our society with relation to healthcare, mortality. Who was the group that was most hit? It was older adults. There's so much data on that. And to me, that is a human rights issue. And unfortunately, I don't know that we're going anywhere in terms of solving that. There's so many things I want to say, and I'm so conscious of 15 minutes. Okay. One of the things that we need to be aware of, we all know now about the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, and the underlying theme of all of the all of the articles is human dignity, that humans have a right to have dignity in society. This is yours from the time you are born. What we also know is that people, as people age, their dignity is slowly taken away. Somebody was just mentioning the issue of, how do I want to put it, needs. Needs are important, and social work does go out, and we still have, students and all who are doing needs assessments. Needs are different than rights. Needs are assessed by a society and by the person who assesses it and says, yes, you have a need for such and such. It's very different from when we talk about social justice and rights. Rights are what you are born with just because you are a human being, okay? And that is what we tend to ignore. So older adults, and I'm just going to go through this real briefly, of where their rights are taken away, okay? One of the things that happens in our society and in a lot of societies are stereotypes and biases. And as soon as these stereotypes and biases impact aging, we have the fact that rights are taken away. Older people, how do we look at them? They tend to be dependent, they need support, they can't think as fast, whatever, right? Age alone becomes a predictor, in a sense, of how people are going to be treated. Personally, I find it really quite offensive when we look at the president now, who, whatever you think, I think he's doing an incredible job. And what is the first thing they say? Well, how could he run again? He's going to, I don't want to get into that. That's what I get into in my classes, but we won't get into that. But again, it just shows that age becomes the factor that we tend to look at. And as soon as age is used to stereotype people, their rights become threatened. That happens continually. It threatens dependency, does not go along with dignity, at least in American society. When you're dependent, you are not autonomous, you need to be supported. And there's two big values that I want to throw in here that impact older people and rights, and those are benevolence and paternalism, okay? The assumption with benevolence is that we are working in the best interest of the person. If the family says, Mom, you can't live here anymore, I'm worried about you, you could fall, whatever. They are working what they feel is through benevolence. They want to take care of. The problem, and this happens in social work, it happens in society, right, is that when benevolence crosses over into paternalism, I know what's best for you. And as I always say to my students, how do I know what's best for you? I don't live your life. You live your life. To know what is best for someone, is it best for them to move out of their house where they've been for 60 years because somebody is worried about their falling or that they can't cook for themselves or whatever? And they said, but this is my home. This is where I want to be. Isn't this my right? Okay. And the family is saying, but we're so worried. That is a simple sort of an issue that social workers, in fact, come across all the time. What is the right of the person to have autonomy, to make their own decisions? And simply out of the fact of your best interest, I want to do what's good for you, we can trespass over those rights. So that is really a concern. How am I doing in time? I have a few more minutes. Okay, thank you. All right. There are, and looking specifically at the Declaration of Human Rights, there are several which really pertain to older adults. The Article 3, life, liberty, and security, that must include choices of where to live, how to live, what your living situation is like, and we tend to take that away. And probably the most severe the most severe attack on this is guardianship, right? When somebody is deemed by the court incompetent, they can't take care of their money or whatever, they are given a guardian. Having a guardian completely takes away your autonomy. And unfortunately, in all the work we've done with guardianship, once a person is given a guardian, it's very hard to get rid of them. It's really hard to go to court and say, I don't need that guardian. Sometimes people only need a guardian to work with finances, to make sure that they've paid bills and whatever. Courts tend to go for complete guardianship. That has been a big, big issue. And that is like the final straw in taking away your dignity and your autonomy. I talked about where to live. That's an issue. No, you can't live alone anymore, but I want to. I've been here. This is where my church is. These are where my friends are. I can manage. No, you can't. I worry too much. Out of the sense of benevolence, taking away autonomy. So life, liberty, and security, which are the number 3 in terms of the articles of the human rights, are very much threatened. Another one, of course, is Social Security that we talk about. And the number 3 is the right to Social Security in society, which you need for dignity. Well, we know as a profession, we know as a society that people cannot live on Social Security. Benefits are very, very low. We talked about in my class in New York the other day. If you're getting $1,700 a month, which is about the median, you cannot maintain rent and living in New York City. It's literally impossible. So security in society is very threatened. There was an interesting thing that came out the other day at a conference I was at, that in OECD countries, the European countries, the benefits that people get at retirement are approximately 63% of what they had when they were working. In the United States, it's only 49%. And as much as we talk about, and Congress talks about increasing Social Security, even with the 8% increase this year, it's not going to do it. Okay, how do you live with dignity when you are struggling to make ends meet? There was a fascinating article in the New York Times, my number 1 place where I go, right, the other day, where they talked about income and inflation and older adults. It was on the front page. And it said in the article that older people today living on a fixed income, and it didn't matter whether you were in Idaho or New York or South Carolina, were struggling. Food has gone up so much when they go to the market that people are making choices. Can they go out? Can they buy this food? Whatever. It was so interesting the way they wrote it, because it wasn't just nutrition. They gave the cases of people who every week met their friends and went to a little diner for lunch. And that was socialization. It was participation. They couldn't do that anymore. They had to cut it down to once a month or every 2 months, because they could not afford to eat out. I thought it was fantastic the way the editorial went, that it's not just hitting nutrition, it's hitting your life. And one of the things that we worry about in this country and around the world, I think, I'm almost done, is the whole issue of isolation. There have been so much written lately about isolation and aging and isolation of older adults, how important participation is. Well, when you have one thing that hits everything else, so many human rights, the right to participate in society, become threatened. So it doesn't stop at one, right? I mentioned COVID. I'm sure somebody else is going to talk about that. The right to a decent living, a standard of living, and a right to health care. COVID took away any thought that we had equal health care. It didn't exist. Okay, and I don't think we've even dealt with that yet. And of course, the right to long-term care. If we're talking about a right to health, we should have a right to long-term care. It is, to me, still fascinating how many people think when they get Medicare, they're going to have long-term care. and this is an aside, and Christina, I'll just shut up at this one. I was teaching this the other day in my class, and I was really concerned about immigrants, new immigrants, undocumented. How do they get health care? I ask any one of you to go to one of the Medicare sites or federal government site and try and figure out what they're telling you. It is a challenge. It was a challenge to me. And I said to my students, you try it, because it is so difficult to understand whether you qualify, whether you don't qualify, what program you might qualify. I thought, if I, with 3 degrees, can't do this, how is a new immigrant, documented or undocumented, going to get through this system? We have a system which also impedes human rights. I'll stop there. It must be about time, but I mean, I could go forever, and I'm not going to do that, but thank you. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cox. And I know that's such a short time to fit in so much important information, and you did it wonderfully. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Rupal Parekh, Assistant Professor at the UConn School of Social Work. Dr. Parekh has over a decade of professional and practice experience working with racially and ethnically diverse older adult populations across the continuum of care. The majority of her research examines environmental and social factors that cause or exacerbate social isolation or loneliness among BIPOC and immigrant older adult populations. Welcome, Dr. Rupal Parekh.
Hello, hold on. I'm just going to share my screen here. Do you all see it?
Yep.
Yeah, we can see it.
Right now?
It's fine.
Great. Hold on. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to move this to a place that okay. All right. I may skip over some of the demographic slides since we've talked about that quite a bit. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and I'm really excited to talk today because I'm going to get to talk about my research and some of the clinical work that I've done also in this space. So my presentation is titled Advancing Transportation Options for Older Adults, a Human Rights Perspective. So I'll quickly maybe share a few demographics. If some of you went to the last presentation, I had the same demographics, but in a nutshell, our aging population is increasing substantially. So just in the United States, which is actually not the fastest growing older adult population, we have countries like Japan and some other Asian countries that have a large, much faster growing older adult population than we do. But just in the US, we're seeing substantial growth in older adult population. It has a lot to do with advancement in healthcare, the baby boomer population, ethnic minorities, a population we call the oldest old. And as many of us have mentioned, many folks have mentioned, social work really is a key discipline in addressing some of the concerns with the older adult population increases. Some of the populations that are increasing substantially in the US and specifically in the US are non-Hispanic Black older adults, non-Hispanic Asian older adults, Hispanic or what we call Latino older adults. These populations are, as you can see in this little bar chart, almost more than doubling some of these populations. So by 2060, we're going to see a tremendous need for adapting our aging services to a diverse population of older adults. And this is going to be a combination of older adults that came here when they were young, older immigrants that came here when they were young and have aged in the United States, and what we call late life older immigrants. So older adults that came here after the age of 60 that have really unique needs, often, and I'll talk about them a little bit more in the presentation. This is just a global look, and we've talked about this as well. If we just kind of look at aging throughout the world, we're seeing that the populations from 1990 to 2050 and beyond are increasing substantially. And to address some of the issues, concerns about this population increasing substantially, AARP and the World Health Organization has developed what we call the age-friendly movement. And they've looked at 8 domains of livability. And these 8 domains include housing, outdoor spaces and building, transportation, communication and information, civic participation and employment, respect and social inclusion, health services and community support, and social participation. And what this really means is that we need to think about how we can make our cities more age-friendly and focus on these 8 domains so that older adults and people of all ages, really, essentially, can eliminate physical and social barriers to aging. And so how must we do this? And so cities actually can become age-friendly. I mean, just think about your stoplight when you push the button and it goes so quickly, right? So I'm in West Hartford and I'm sitting there and I'm by Blueback Square and I'm trying to cross the road and I'm running, right? And I'm 46 years old and I have no physical disabilities as of yet. And I'm still running to get across the street. Think about an older adult. So these are the kinds of things that we really need to think about, policymakers, and we need to start supporting policies, technologies that promote and enhance older adults and really people of all ages, physical and mental health throughout their lives. And these, what we may think of as small things, can really make a difference in somebody saying, hey, I want to go outside today and I want to go out for a coffee or I want to meet a friend. So those are the types of things that we're talking about when we say, how do we make a community more age-friendly? So now cities across the United States, for example, New York City, as Dr. Cox knows, is age-friendly, and they were kind of the one of the first cities in the United States to become age-friendly. But this is a global movement. So this is not just in the United States. We see cities across the world, Europe. There are many cities in Europe that have become age-friendly, that have received the distinction of being age-friendly. We're also looking at how can universities become age-friendly? How can health systems become age-friendly? So my focus in research, or one of my focuses in research, is transportation. So that's part of the livability, 8 domains of livability, as you just saw there. It's part of that. And what we see is that many older adults relied on the automobile as their primary source of transportation. And this is because communities after World War II were really kind of set up that way. There are highways built, and so people rely on the automobile, but ethnic minority populations still often rely on public transportation. And what we see is that public transportation, especially in marginalized communities, is often not affordable, accessible, it's difficult to get to, and this can be really challenging for older adult populations. And so in what Dr. Cox has talked about quite a bit, but in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we see that there is in Article 13 that everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. So given the importance of this role, it is expected that policymakers, advocates, social workers, clinicians, everyone that works with older adult population really push for policies that support transportation equity. So here's a definition of what transportation equity is. What this really means is fair and just access to travel when and how one wants to get there, with minimal constraint. It means having transportation that is accessible, like I said, safe, affordable, regardless of an individual's specific situation. However, like I said, this is becoming increasingly difficult for older adults, particularly older adults that are living in marginalized communities. So there are plenty of barriers to transportation. If you can see right here, and this is specific to older adults, there are individual barriers. Most older adults rely, like I said, on driving. And as they get older, this can become more and more difficult. Social factors, when older adults have to rely on family and friends for transportation, it can be really difficult because, as we know, rides are not always reliable. And so this can be very difficult. So relying on your social networks, your living situation, maybe a bus is far away from where you live, a bus stop. So it becomes difficult for you to access reliable transportation. There are institutional factors, particularly when you see people that are older adults that are in institutions. This can be really difficult because they have to often rely on transit that is, that the institution provides, and it may not accommodate their particular needs and when and where they want to get to a particular place. I see this quite often. Not only for folks that are institution, but folks that rely on paratransit and dial-a-ride. And these are services that older adults, if they are eligible for this particular program, many immigrants aren't, so I will talk about that a little bit more as well. They rely on these transportation services that are not reliable, so it becomes really difficult. I see people waiting several hours to get picked up to go to a doctor's office. And I've had clients tell me in the past that they've waited 5 or 6 hours, their whole trip, meaning they waited 2 hours before they were late to their doctor's appointment. When they showed up to the doctor, if they were able to see the doctor, they, after their doctor's appointment, waited another hour or two to get picked up and go home. So you can see that the hardship that would cause anybody, let alone an older adult. There are environmental factors, and these things are, just what I was talking about, obviously related to public transportation, but also your sidewalks. So if you can't get to your bus stop because the sidewalks are not accessible, or they're unsafe to walk on if you're an older adult, or oftentimes for anybody, this can be really challenging. So I talk a little bit here about my grandmother, because my interest really kind of lies with older immigrants and BIPOC older adults. And when I first kind of really started thinking about this is when my grandmother immigrated here from the Fiji Islands. And she was an older adult, so she would be a late life immigrant. She came here as an older adult, and she was really socially isolated. She was used to walking around in her community, going to her neighbor's house, being able to go to the grocery store by herself. But when she came here, she had to depend on my parents, who were working at the time, and other people for her transportation needs. And this became really challenging, and I saw her health decline fairly quickly. And she talked to me about how she's lost her independence, how she can't get around anymore. She can't go to the temple like she would. Just her activities of daily living, her instrumental activities of daily living, they were just impacted. She couldn't do the things that she wanted to do, and was dependent on her family for all of her needs. I remember she'd make a grocery list of things that she would want, and then she'd say, "Oh, I forgot to put this on my list, and I can't go myself. You don't know how agonizing that is for me." And I didn't. I was 14 years old. I didn't realize it, but somehow something stuck for me. And I've dedicated my my work to this because of her, I really would like to say. And since then I had about 10 years of practice, and I worked at various places throughout my career. And it was really through the continuum of care. I started my work at Mother Teresa's homes for the destitute and dying in India. And then throughout my work, throughout my career, I worked what we call the continuum of care, everywhere from home care to hospice. And some of the biggest challenges I saw were older adults having issues with transportation. Oftentimes I worked with interdisciplinary teams who would say, oh, the older adult didn't show up for their appointment. And when I would call, the social worker, of course, would call and say what happened. And it was often due to transportation. And so this became even a further interest for me because of the needs that I saw in my practice work. I'm not going to go over this, but we're also seeing a increase in immigrant populations, demographic trends in the US with older adults. And some of the issues that we see here are similar to what we see with older adult populations. But one that we really see that, we see again with all older adults, but social isolation and loneliness, like I said, with my grandmother, really becomes a major issue, and not having adequate transportation often is the focus of that. But what we're also seeing is a large number of older immigrants moving to rural areas. And when they do move to rural areas, they are also dependent on ride providers to take them to, meet their basic needs, to go visit friends, go to church, temple, mosque, or even healthcare appointments. And this can be really challenging for this population. So most recently, I did a research study using social network analysis to optimize access to culturally responsible and affordable transportation for older adults. I did this study at the Hispanic Senior Center in Hartford and the Vietnamese Senior Center in Arlington, Texas. And what this study was looking at, and our goal really was to really come up with appropriate transportation solutions for older immigrants and migrants, because we really see disparities in access to services. And we see that there is a high risk for social isolation and reduced physical and mental health. So this survey research examined the mobility, activity spaces, transportation patterns, resources, and needs as it relates to transportation and their support networks, and of course, well-being among these participants. We also looked at the ride providers, and we wanted to see the impact that providing rides had on these providers. So if you look at caregiver research, anybody interested in caregiver research, we see that the burden that most most caregivers talk about, qualitative research in this area, is actually providing rides. And so to doctor's appointments, to, like I said, to, various activities that an older adult may do. And think about all the transportation or all the activities or the social participation that older adults cannot do or don't tell their caregiver that they want to do because they know that it may be a burden on the caregiver. Caregivers are often their family members, right? Their children, adult children, sometimes friends. So this was an interesting study, and we recently finished collecting data. We're still analyzing the data, but some of the kind of key findings were that most people still continue to rely on the automobile for their transportation, and they're relying on their on rides from their family and friends. And many, like I said earlier, many older adults, almost 30%, are missing key activities in their life. If it's visiting friends, going to the doctor, or even religious activities. Here's some more. I probably don't have time. I don't know how much time I have, but this is just some more data related to the study. And this is specifically on the Vietnamese older adults. But what we saw is that most older adults stated that they disagreed or strongly disagreed that they knew how to use public transportation in their communities. So they didn't know the bus routes, they didn't know the schedules. And this often is because most transportation services are not translated in various languages. So this can be a real challenge here. Transportation cost and burden. Again, this is the Vietnamese Senior Center because we've just finished analyzing that data. But what we see here is that over, a large minority of the sample of the older adults said that they were what we call transportation burden. And this are financial burden. That means they were spending over 15% of their income on transportation. And that is a real issue when you're spending that much on transportation. And then we looked at, like I said, the impacts of providing rides, and half of the providers said that they incurred transportation expenses, missed work, and experienced increased personal stress as a result of providing rides. And many of these transportation providers are also older adults. This is another study I'm doing. I don't know how much time I have because I can't see the time. I have no more time.
You can take another minute, Dr. Parekh,
Okay.
if you want to wrap up.
Okay, this is another study I'm doing. I don't have that much time to go over it, but please reach out to me if you're interested. This is a study looking at re-engaging Black and African-American older adults during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we're seeing is we're seeing less participation in churches and senior centers, which is really what we know for Black and African-American communities, particularly the church, a hub for social engagement. And, you know, not going to church, not going to the senior center can really impact health and mental health outcomes. And although we don't know all the barriers to re-engagement, what we do know, what previous research tells us, that transportation consistently is a barrier for participation. So this research is going to look at the physical, psychological, and social barriers. And we're going to interview providers. We're going to interview folks that are not attending church in senior centers. Of course, we're going to get the help of these senior centers and churches to help identify these folks and folks that are attending, and try to better understand what are the reasons. And I mean, I would imagine transportation is going to come up as a major theme in this work. I'm just going to briefly mention what is it looking like in the future. There is this goal for us to create more options and flexibility for transportation for all populations, not just older adults. But there is this, there are many communities across the country and globally that are looking at how to create more transportation options. And there's this idea of universal basic mobility. And basically, in a nutshell, this would provide a minimum level of transportation to all older adults. And they would, like you pay for a Netflix subscription, you'd pay a monthly subscription to access multiple mobility services on a single platform. And there are countries and cities across, like I said, globally, that are actually implementing this. And there are ways that we can implement some of this or influence social policy to really start addressing the issues, and maybe even implementing a program. And this is just, I thought, a wonderful picture. This is potentially what the website could look like, or the app could look like. So I look forward to the growing transportation options for older adults, but we have quite a bit of disparities, and it really is a human rights issue, because we all should have the right to move the way that we want to and have access to affordable, reliable transportation. I have a lot more to say on this, just like all of us. So thank you for listening, and please reach out to me if you have any questions or are interested in this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Parekh. So I'm going to introduce our final panelist, Dr. Catherine Medina. Dr. Medina is an associate professor emerita at the University of Connecticut. She demonstrates a passion for teaching, research, administration, and community service through her scholarly work. She has a solid commitment to working with diverse populations and a strong focus on the social determinants of health on well-being. Her depth of knowledge crosses many national and international research areas: health disparities and health equity, aging, behavioral health, and interprofessional collaborative practice in Vietnam, Costa Rica, and Puerto Rico. Dr. Medina served as a principal investigator on 3 HRSA grants to address the need for interprofessional training and the workforce shortage in geriatrics and behavioral health. She served as a commissioner for the State of Connecticut Commission on Health Equity, is a National Institute on Aging Fellow, and was the chairperson of the board of directors of the Connecticut Hispanic Health Council. Dr. Medina earned the NASW CT Educator of the Year in 2019, and she currently works in hospice care in Long Island. Dr. Medina, take it away.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And my talk today is about healthy aging across Latino populations, the United States, and Latin America. Latinx, and you'll hear me talk about Latino, Latinx, Hispanic. I try to get rid of in my presentation because of the paternalistic relationship of Hispanics. But part of the research, when you do research on some of these demographics, they don't refer to Latinx. They refer to Latino or Hispanic. So know that I will be using these terms somewhat interchangeably. So if we, I'm going to be talking about Latinx older persons, and like any other ethnic group, they're not monolithic. There are distinct groups from across the Americas and the Caribbean. They're Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Panamanians, Venezuelans, Brazilians, and many more, but they are racially, ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse. They are varied in their social, economic, immigration experiences, and their political backgrounds. Their stories are multidimensional. Latinx older persons are strong in numbers, they are on the move, and they have long life expectancy. In fact, the public health debate of Latinx older adults in the United States has been framed within the Latino mortality paradox. And this really talks that despite adversity and diverse challenges that Latino and Latinx face, such as lack of health insurance, lack of access and availability of health care, including mental health, lack of preventive care, linguistic and cultural barriers, and high levels of poverty, Latinx older adults live longer than their white counterparts by 3 years. But we live with chronic illnesses and comorbidities, and this has been referred to as the Latino paradox. The aging process and its association with health is affected by the intersectionality of many factors, among them level of education, acculturation, economic status, linguistic ability, health literacy, living arrangements, social networks and supports, and the level of connectedness to a community. And I think in all our talks today, we have talked about this social support level of connectivity to reduce isolation in older adults. But I remember the words of one patient who said to me, "I may be poor in money, but rich in my soul because of my spirit." She continued her cuento, meaning her narrative, connecting her healthy aging spirit with the 3 F's. And they're not bad words. Their family, faith, and feeling a part of something, their worthiness. For many older Latinx, this cuento of healthy aging is influenced by relational status, a spirit of connectedness, and social ties. So continuing along this perspective, I will succinctly describe some demographic for the US and Latin America, define healthy aging as a human right, and note some implications for social work practice and policy. I'd like to share some demographics because they demonstrate how the Latinx older adults are strong in numbers, they're on the move, and they live longer despite disparities. So being strong in numbers, the US Latinx population reached 62.1 million in 2020,
accounting for 19% of all Americans and making them the nation's second largest racial and ethnic group behind white Americans. It is also one of the fastest growing groups in the United States. Between 2010 and 2020, the country's Latinx population grew by 23%. What you see in these statistics is also the connection, and Dr. Thomas talked about it in her presentation, and that is the connection between the older population and youth, because there's a dividend when you have a younger population that can support the social protections for an older population. So we need to keep that in mind. So Latinx account for more than half of the US population growth over the past 2 decades. So we're big in numbers. With Mexicans comprising 60%. Yet the percentage of people from Paraguay, Honduras, Guatemala has quadrupled, while the Venezuelan community has increased by 6-fold. Latinx have expanded beyond traditional geographic spaces. So we're on the move. We're moving, and, Rupal, I heard you say that, the older population is moving into rural areas. It's interesting to see the Latinx population, older population, moving from the Northeast into spaces that are sparse in Latino populations. For example, over the last 20 years, North and South Dakota experienced the fastest growth in Latino population, while Kentucky, South Carolina, and Alabama all saw increases well above 200%. This is without DeSantis now. We are living, and without Greg Abbott, moving migrants, but again, these are pretty much US Latinx older adults that are Americans. We're living longer with life expectancy. Along with these general trends for the American Latinx population, the Latinx older population is also growing. In 2019, Latinx American age 65 made up 9% of the older population, and by 2060, the percentage is projected to be 21%, with the number of Latinx Americans aging at 85 and older projected to increase by 667 times in 2060. So that 85 and older population is something that we have to prepare for. In 2018, the life expectancy at birth for Latinx American men was 79 and 84 for women, in comparison to their white counterparts, which was 76 for men and 81 for women. On average, this is a 3-year difference, in line with the Latino mortality paradox. However, and I know Dr. Cox mentioned this, or Carol, however, COVID-19 rapidly diminished the mortality rate for Latinx older persons, because older Latinx are far more likely than their white counterparts to have been hospitalized or died because of the pandemic. Yet today, Latinx still live longer, but only by 3/4 of a year. So that very short period of time went from 3 years through to 3/4 of a year. In 2020, the leading cause of death for older Latinx was COVID-19. In comparison, Latin America countries are still younger and than most advanced economies, but the population aging is expected to accelerate. Currently, Around 8% of the population in Latin America is 65 years of age or older, still way below Europe's 18%. In Latin America, the elderly population is expected to double to 17.5 by 2050 and to exceed 30% by the end of this century. The 2020 Economy and Development Report addresses aging as a widespread, celebrated phenomenon. Rising living standards and better access to quality healthcare have increased the life expectancy of Latin Americans to close to 75 years. Chileans and Costa Ricans can expect to live up to 80, which is longer than the US citizen. Countries with the youngest population like Paraguay, Bolivia, Guatemala may still benefit from the dividend of a younger population until 2045. But Uruguay, Brazil, Colombia have only a couple of years left, while the dividend is already spent in Chile and Costa Rica because they have reached a large aging population and don't have a young enough population to offset. It is expected by 2030 that Latin American countries will have more older adults 60 and over than youth younger than 5. Moreover, their healthcare systems are deeply fragmented, affecting availability and quality of care. Like the United States, COVID-19 exposed pervasive ageism in society and healthcare systems inequities and inequalities. For healthy aging, Latin America is taking a systematic approach by promoting a stronger labor force, participation of women and older adults as a priority, fostering formalization of pension plans. This is because a lot of people don't have pension plans in Latin America, and it's the way that they really have arranged their social protection systems. So they're trying to get the informal economy into these pension plans. So they need to reform pension and healthcare systems to preserve equitable access to health services and pension benefits. The graying of global societies, referred to as the silver tsunami, has many challenges, all of which have implications for social work practice. In conclusion, social work needs to view healthy aging as one that centers on the multidimensional human capacity to thrive and flourish from prenatal to the end of life, rather than the absence of disease. The United States has always had a disease model, and social work has always gone to that model to really do assessments. And, you know, Carol, I know you talked a little bit about this. For example, if we look at healthy aging in that construct, it would be a normal lifespan that emphasizes well-being as a dynamic state on a continuum. The older adult continues to develop their potential, work productively and creatively, build strong and positive relationships, and contribute to their society. When theorists, especially social science theorists, support the healthy aging encompasses human thriving, human dignity, and self-determination, they are connecting wellness and aging as a human right. This perspective promotes a fair and just society that holds the right to equality of access to goods and resources, whether they are transportation, whether they're healthcare and mental health services, opportunities, and the probability of life chances for actualizing successful outcomes for all the members of society. Healthy aging is a function of a just society, allowing all members of society their human capacity to flourish and to have healthy outcomes. According to my research, which I did with my colleague Negroni, we emphasize 3 positive influences that affect healthy aging in Latino elders: family relationships, social support networks, and health and mental health service delivery within a community context. My colleague and I illustrated the effectiveness of community programs as best practice models. However, policy and programs need to include organizational, not just provider, but organizational and provider cultural competence, humility, and interprofessional collaborations to challenge the structural inequities and reduce health and mental health disparities. As social workers, we need to create spaces for older persons, their families, their social ties and network to shift an age's mindset. This approach encourages interactive older participant involvement for changing patterns and integrating new perspective and reframing their narratives in a questioning manner. Social work needs to use the cuentos of older adults as a psychodynamic tool to view chronic illness and stress, comorbidity, and their strength in maintaining and managing challenges that impact their bodies, their minds, their spirit, especially after COVID-19. Policymakers will need to ensure adequate benefits for the growing share of older Latinx, notably their social acceptability. Older adults want autonomy, self-determination, and rights to their lived experiences. As societies, we need to ask, how do we embrace their well-being and respect their human rights without our ageism and bias? How do they, the older Latinx and older adults, self-define, self-power, and how do we create those safe and caring spaces, understanding their cuentos, their stories, their lived experiences for healthy aging? The human capacity of older Latinx to control bodily health, bodily and mind, spirit integrity, and engage in health decision-making is to maintain dignity and self-determination throughout the aging process. And I hope social work profession moves along a healthy aging perspective rather than the medical model, which is so binary. And I could talk a little more about that if asked a question. Do I still have time? Or am I over?
You're a little over, but that's okay. What you had to
Okay,
say
I didn't
was
see
super
anything go
important.
up.
I didn't want to be rude and keep it up, so
Okay,
sorry about that.
okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we can go ahead and move into the questions and answers. Dr. Cox, I know that you have a hard stop too, and there was a question in the chat that looks like you were going to save for your class, but maybe for those of us who won't be able to attend your class, I'm just going to briefly read the question and maybe you can expand on it a little bit. We have, what policies would you recommend to be developed to ensure individuals maintain their own autonomy in decision-making throughout the lifespan? On a micro level, how can family members ensure they are not falling into the trap of paternalism when considering living arrangements for older family members, particularly if cognitive issues arise? And you're muted, Dr. Cox. Dr. Cox, you're muted.
Okay, so this is one of my students, one of my really great students, and I was so pleased to see she was here and that she was asking a question. It's such a good social work question because that is exactly what a practitioner is going to be dealing with when they're working with families. I really want mom to move. I'm worried, blah, blah, blah. Mom wants to stay here. What do I? It's so basic. We've all experienced, or at least many of us have experienced in our own families, the desire for independence and the sense that, no, I can't, they can't do it. So this whole concept of paternalism and benevolence, I think, is key to working with older adults. My immediate point would be, if you're the social worker, you're the practitioner, is you have to listen to both people, right? You cannot arbitrarily say, no, this person has to stay at home. You can't, you're not the family. And as I talk about in my classes, we cannot get into somebody else's life. We talk about the critical theory now of aging, where it's hard to understand because I can't live your life. I can't live Rebecca's life. I can't live Rupal's life. We don't know what each other are. So I think as a practitioner you are in a great position to talk to both people. What do they want? What is important to them? Why do you really want to stay here? Help them to understand, in fact, that the relative or so is, quote, the best interest, right? But also help them to understand, help the relative to understand that what they see is the best interest may not be the best interest. It's complex. And we know as a society, we refuse to have supports for the family. I mean, this was another thing that Biden even talked about the other night in his State of the Union message. We need more help for family caregivers. We cannot do that as a country. We are so far behind any other developed country in terms of giving support to the family. If I see one more study that says how overburdened family caregivers are, I'm going to go like, duh, this was 40 years ago. It's not gotten easier. If anything, it's gotten harder because people are living longer and longer and longer. Even with Alzheimer's disease, they're living longer. The family continues to be the main source of support. So we don't have a lot of options, right? Except that as a social worker to really try and listen to both sides. I remember when I was doing clinical work, there was a family, there were like 4 children, all involved with the parents, right? And it always reminds me of that old story that one mother can raise 5 children, but 5 children can't take care of one mother. And literally that was it. There were all these issues, and we had a big group family meeting where everybody listened. And, somehow in social work, that's key, isn't it? What we're supposed to be doing is listening, not telling people, but listening and then working from their perspective. I think that's the only thing we can do, right? Of course, and one of the things I've recognized always when I used to work with Alzheimer's families, we have such a myth in this country that families don't want to take care, right? What I found so much at the time was that even when the person was caring for someone with really severe AD, they still didn't want to let go. They kept saying, I'll do it. Among some of my Black families I was working with, it was, Jesus wouldn't give me more than I can do. And how do and I would say, well, Jesus didn't deal with Alzheimer's disease for a very long time. I mean, that people feel they can do more. And we know that caregivers burn out. There's no question that caregivers burn out. And until we have some kind of a society which recognizes this and puts in supports for people, it's up to the practitioner. And I think, Erica asked a really fabulous question. What do social workers do? You can't bring somebody in because we don't have them, right? That's the way it is in this country. It's the family, let them do it. We're not going to spend more money on that. So you listen and you try to work out a system. But I think that also helping people to realize that sometimes what they see is in the best interest of the person may actually not be in their best interest. So how do you work around that? It's touchy. And, and as people continue, as Catherine is saying, to live longer and longer, this is going to impact all of us. All right.
And if you don't mind, I just want to add a few things. Dr. Cox, that was beautifully said. I love your comment on a mother can raise 5 children, but 5 children can't raise. Thank you for saying that. I'm going to use that. That's wonderful.
I didn't make it
so
up.
True.
Story.
So true. I've done the same work you have, and I've seen it many times. But one key thing that I saw that really helped families in situations where there was this, where a family member had really different ideas than the older adult had, a lot of education. And oftentimes the issue was aging in place. Can I age in place? Can I age in my own home? Am I going to need more care at home? What does that look like? Am I going to go to a facility? The fear of going to a facility that really kind of, becomes front and center for an older adult sometimes. And so they may actually lose track of, what the situation really is, because they're really influenced by their fear. And then you see, the number one way of providing care right now is long distance caregiving. So it could be such a challenge, right? So you have 5 or 6 family members trying to piece together the care, but there's nobody in the same city as the parent. And so that's really challenging. I provide a lot of educational resources to families, like how can my parent really, my family member stay at home? What are the home and community-based services? And, a lot of folks don't know. They think, okay, well, if I'm not in town and my mom's, just had a fall, then we have to do something. We have to change her living situation immediately. And that might not always be the answer. And they may not know that, oh, okay, there's a senior center. The home can be modified and Medicaid is going to pay for that. They might not know all of those things, or there's not really great transportation services, but there are some, so I spend a lot of time educating the family member because I worked with a lot of long distance caregivers, and we're seeing that more and more. And so that there's a lot of people operating on fear, and, educating both family members and the older adult and connecting them to resources can really, put people on the same page.
I think you just raised a really good point too, is that we have an issue in the society too about people don't know. We think people know, and they don't know. The information doesn't get out to people. As I said, just looking on the web, trying to get to the Medicare page, I was like, what? I don't even understand this, right?
But can I say something, Carol?
Please. Oh, yeah.
Basically, that is purposeful. That information is not accessible or
you can't use the service. Exactly. And we don't have to pay for it.
Culturally competent so that we can increase health literacy so people can get information, understand the information, and then process the action steps that they need for medical compliance. Is a big issue in this country for all aging adults. But the other piece is respite. There is such a thing as respite where a caregiver can take, I work in hospice, and we might have someone who will need only a week to be at the center. It's a facility of 8 beds, and, they can go to that center to give respite to that caregiver for 1 week, sometimes 2 weeks. And I have seen people that use that service quite frequently on a quarterly basis. So that's another piece, but knowing your resources. But remember that resources are not going to be out there in your face, because there's a movement from policy where you don't want to make things too accessible now. This country relies on policies that are adequate. That's it. Minimum services and adequate. That's all we want to provide. So just to complement that, but Fernando, are there more questions?
Yeah. I think something to ponder about is to think like, how do we move from a targeted response to a much more universal response? And I know we're not there yet, but I think we begin to think about a much more universal response where we can meet the needs of older adults. Let's get to the next question.
Sure. There's a question from Dr. Healy for Carol Cox. Would you expand a little on the increased threats to human rights of older persons who were in congregate facilities during the COVID pandemic, both nursing homes and high-end life care communities?
I think Catherine also sort of alluded to that. The toll, we know there was high mortality in nursing homes of residents. And when you actually look at the data, the highest mortality was among African Americans, and I think even Hispanic residents. I don't remember where Hispanics were on that, but among African American residents was really, really high. The disparity, to me, it just magnified. It was just a wake-up call, one would hope, to what the heck is going on in our healthcare system here. We know, in some ways you look at, I always like the theory, cumulative advantage, cumulative disadvantage, so that, advantage starts, I always say to my students, prenatally, when the mother gets the right nutrition, blah, 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 and the kid then goes to the right schools and gets the right job and all that, or the mother does not have good nutrition, she lives in poverty, she has a lot of issues to deal with, and then so does the child and all that, and it goes on through the lifespan. So we know that, for instance, African American elderly have more chronic diseases, chronic health conditions, high blood pressure, higher incidence of strokes. These things already weakened, I think, their immune systems when they go into nursing homes. The homes that these people also are in are not necessarily the #1 nursing home in the state. Okay, so there's a disparity in the treatment. There's a disparity among the groups that are going in. And then, of course, they're weakened by COVID. Staffing was a big issue. We know that in the nursing homes. It was a really, really big issue, which is a crime again in this country, that we cannot pay the people who are doing the majority of the hard work a decent salary. We count on them to do it. Often they're immigrants. We pay them as little as we can, and they struggled. Right? That, I think, related to what was happening. But the disparity that happened with COVID, the amount of mortalities and the nursing home admissions of minority groups in this country was stunning. And one would hope, I'm always a little bit optimistic, that was a wake-up call to do something about healthcare. Right. I'm sure, and there was data as well. We know that people in all groups did not get vaccinated right away. And we know that this still goes on, right? When you look at the data right now, it's still there. COVID-19 is still hitting people over 50, over 60. I mean, I know people who've had it twice now, even though they've had all the vaccination and they're in their 60s and come down with COVID again. It is there. Right. And yet we have taken away all the mask restrictions, everything else. Just go out, enjoy yourself. To me, this is still an issue for older people. How much are you comfortable participating if you go into a store or a grocery store or whatever, and nobody else but you has a mask on? Mm-hmm. It's certainly on our subways in New York. It's a joke. It's really a joke. Nobody wears a mask. So, it's still, COVID is still there. We can't ignore it. And I suspect, my fear is that those people who are of different ethnic groups, who don't belong, who whatever, don't have access to great health care, are going to still be the most vulnerable. They haven't shown the recent data in terms of that, but they have shown that, you know, the Times does a thing almost every day about COVID and where it is, and it is still there among older people. But we don't even, why is it, you know, if you want to talk about this, why is it we have said it's okay not to mask anymore? Do people not care about what happens to older people? I don't know. Catherine, what do you think? I mean, it's.
Yeah, well, you know, the exposure that the older person is subjected to when they have family members that are outside and come into the home and no one's masking up, that exposure is a reason why so many older adults tested positive for COVID. And I just wanted Lynn Healy's question go back a little bit. In New York, it was even worse than that. If I remember, Governor Cuomo made a decision that because the hospitals were so full and they couldn't take any more patients, that they were going to transfer them over to nursing homes.
Right.
And it's this idea that the life of older adults is worth less than the lives of younger persons. So I just want to put that out. And, you know, he got into big trouble, but it got hushed very quickly. But that came up as an issue in New York with Governor Cuomo.
Thank you, Dr. Medina, for mentioning that. And in Connecticut, we lost the largest number of older adults in nursing homes. And, you know, Dr. Cox, to your point about staffing, you know, the NASW in Connecticut, I mentioned this last time during another talk, you know, passed a bill that increased the number of social workers per residence from 1 for every 120 residents. Ridiculous for so many reasons that I don't have time to talk about right now, to 1 to 60 residents. However, when I talk to people on the ground, they're telling me there's major implementation issues. It's not happening. This is 2.5 years after COVID. Okay, I was a director of social work. That doesn't mean anything. I was the only social worker for a 157 bed facility. I discharge plan for 20 patient residents a day because at least 40% of those residents were skilled. That means they come in for rehab for a short period of time. And I would stay till 9 o'clock every day at work and get paid to stay till 5, just because I had to do my job or I couldn't sleep at night, right? So this is the kind of, and people leave, you know, people leave after 2 years. They leave, social workers leave after 2 or 3 years because I couldn't keep that up. Like if I had a family, you know, I was single at the time. So this is a real challenge. I'm really proud of the NASW Connecticut for passing that legislation, but I am about to call some folks there actually, because I recently learned that the implementation issues are really a problem and they're just finding loopholes around it. About this is not happening. What can we do as an organization to push this forward? So, you know, even though we see legislation that's passed and we have, you know, social workers that are fighting for this, sometimes these implementation issues really become challenges because we're working with many people. It's just not social workers that are doing this work. So just wanted to say that.
We do have one more question. I had a couple myself, but I don't think we'll have time. Dr. Thomas, do you think we have time for this one last question? Okay. So we have here, agree so much about the complexity of Medicare and insurance. It's a challenge for anyone to figure it out. It's a helpless feeling at a vulnerable time. At the age of retirement, you don't have the ability to earn more and to make up the deficit. Is there any effort to simplify it at the state or federal level?
I mean, as we know, like I just briefly say, and Dr. Cox mentioned this, that Medicare does not pay for long-term care. That's a major misconception in our country. Medicaid, which is income-based. So very few people are from the get-go eligible for long-term care, and there's only certain facilities that take Medicaid. So even that the type of long-term care that you receive could be really challenging because those facilities aren't the greatest. However, there are different states that are doing various kinds of programs, like Money Follows the Person, for example. So Money Follows the Person is a program where if you are wanting to stay in your community or wanting to stay in the assisted living or another place that does not traditionally pay, where Medicare or Medicaid does not traditionally pay for that service, you could utilize the monies to use to either stay at home or stay in assisted living. Again, however, only certain groups that, you have to it's still income based, and you wouldn't necessarily be eligible for it through you are not eligible through Medicare. So I think revitalizing or rethinking how Medicare, that Medicare is not, should, pay for that. Medicare really should include long-term care, custodial care, I think is probably the only way. Long-term care insurance is only beneficial. That's what they tell you if you bought it before the age of 40. I mean, I've been a geriatric social worker for since I was 21, long time. And I knew this, but could never afford to buy it because I was a social worker, so it's not realistic. I can't, the only way I can think of it is restructuring Social Security and how the monies that are filtered there, what bucket of money goes, where that bucket of money goes. But I have a paper that I show, this is a big controversial thing. Everybody's on welfare, right? So the tax exemptions you get for, the house that you buy, all of those monies are part of the same bucket of money. So I think it's restructuring a lot of financial structures that probably people that are benefiting from those structures are unwilling to do. Social Security and Medicare monies alone, we're in a controversial situation about Medicare right now. I mean, so right now, we're relooking at the budget. So I think it's restructuring other programs that come from similar buckets of money, but most of us are not aware of. So I think it's a huge challenge, but I think it can be done if people rethink our financial structures. Probably an economist needs to answer that question.
You dream.
Thank you. Really challenging and interesting discussion. In the interest of time and recognizing that people need to leave, I want to thank the panelists very much for their contribution and their preparation and their thoughtful content in a very short period of time. I want to thank the advisory board that raised this topic as an issue that we need to address. I want to thank the planning committee and Milagros for helping us put this exciting program together. So there's lots of thoughts laid out for you to think about. We certainly don't have solutions, but certainly beginning to think about older persons in the new framework and how do we engage in a much more meaningful, egalitarian way to be socially and politically and environmentally and economically inclusive to have a much more sustainable environment. So thank you again very much. And I want to bring this meeting to a close. I appreciate your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.